Mr. President.
Senator from North Dakota.
Mr. President, in a little while, we're going to vote to proceed to Senate Joint Resolution 62 that I introduced with Senator Hoeven to repeal the Biden administration's Bureau of Land Management Resource Management Plan for North Dakota. Of course, House Joint Resolution 105, which mirrors our bill introduced by Congresswoman Fedorchak, has already passed the House of Representatives, and final passage is scheduled for later this evening. The Bureau of Land Management, or BLM as we call it, is the landlord of over 745 million acres of land and subsurface deposits nationwide. BLM's management of these public resources is governed by what's known as the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, otherwise known as FLPMA, which requires, I stress, requires the Bureau to develop resource management plans, or RMPs, to guide management decisions. And when created, Congress was clear. These RMPs must abide by the multiple use mandate. Now, Mr. President, multiple use is a term that's thrown around a lot in the public lands discussions. It was championed by President Theodore Roosevelt, who drew from his experience in his two ranches in North Dakota, the Maltese Cross and the Elkhorn Ranch, and throughout the West. And by the way, North Dakota is where his presidential library is being built and will be open next July 4th, unpaid announcement. Multiple use means, Mr. President, that land is sustainably used by the state and local population rather than preserved like a national park or a wildlife refuge. Multiple use lands are used by miners, cattle grazers, oil and gas developers, and recreationalists alike. They are not meant to be locked up. Mr. President, multiple use is a mandate, as I said earlier. It is not a suggestion, and that is what brings us here today. In the final days of the Biden administration, they approved the North Dakota Resource Management Plan, which governs the management of 58,500 surface acres and, Mr. President, 4.1 million acres of mineral estate across our state for the next 15 to 20 years. Despite vocal objection from the state, the people who actually use the land, the final plan prohibits coal leasing on over 4 million acres by inexcusably prohibiting all future development outside of a 4-mile radius from current development. Over 90% of North Dakota's affordable, reliable coal out of touch. It's gone. It also blocks 213,000 acres, or 44%, of federally owned oil and gas acreage from future development. This restriction alone deprives the state, and we're a small state, deprives the state of $34 million annually. And get this, the state's Common Schools Trust Fund, a minimum of $50 million. And if that wasn't enough, Mr. President, non-federal minerals are also held hostage to the federal government's management plan. As I mentioned earlier, these RMPs govern subsurface acreage. Whether it's coal, oil, or gas, federally owned subsurface minerals are intermingled with state and private mineral owners. In plain speak, the Biden Resource Management Plan is a de facto taking from the state and private mineral owners. Throughout the rulemaking process, this point was made very clear, but BLM ignored them. And it's unacceptable and needs to be undone. And I'll add, Mr. President, it needs to be undone by Congress so it's clear to the bureaucracy that this sort of resource management plan is out of bounds. By passing this resolution, we reassert congressional intent and remind the bureaucracy our boundaries are not optional. Mr. President, this rule will need to be replaced once we repeal it. And thank goodness Congress had the oversight in the Congressional Review Act to say no replacement rule could be substantially similar to the one it's replacing. But by no means does it preclude the proper replacement of a rule. I have the utmost confidence in Secretary Burgum and Deputy Secretary McGregor to get this done right, but this cannot sit on the back burner. Nearly 6 years ago, during the first Trump administration, I wrote a letter on behalf of a single constituent advocating for this RMP to be updated so he could develop some of his privately held minerals. They started the work, but unfortunately, the Biden administration finished the work. And while Congress is acting to repeal their disastrous plan today, the administration must swiftly replace this RMP, ensuring North Dakota gets the best long-term plan possible to responsibly utilize our natural resources. And I urge my colleagues to support this resolution, and I yield back.
Senator from North Dakota.
I rise in support of the resolution that Senator Cramer and I introduced to overturn the Bureau of Land Management Resource Management Plan for North Dakota. This flawed plan, finalized during the closing hours of the Biden administration, undermines BLM's multiple-use mandate and restricts access to vast taxpayer-owned energy reserves in North Dakota. It's yet another example of the Biden administration's overreaching Green New Deal agenda intended to block access to domestic energy production. North Dakota is an energy powerhouse and the third largest oil-producing state in the nation. Our energy producers operate under the highest environmental standards in the world. But the Biden administration's North Dakota Resource Management Plan ignores that record of responsible energy development. Instead, the North Dakota Resource Management Plan seeks to curtail coal, oil, and gas production by locking away taxpayer-owned energy reserves and jeopardizing our nation's energy security. Under this plan, nearly 213,000 acres, or 45% of federal oil and gas acreage, is closed off to new leasing. It also closes off access to over 4 million acres, nearly 99% of federal coal, impacting development at all of North Dakota's major lignite coal mines. These restrictions will drive up supply costs for our baseload coal-fired power plants, costs that will be ultimately passed on to electric customers across the region. And we supply a large region of the Midwest with electric power. And this comes at a time when energy demand is rising, as manufacturing is brought back home and new industries like artificial intelligence and data centers are coming online. Our need for affordable, reliable energy is only growing. It makes no sense for the federal government to restrict access to the very resources needed to power our economy. In North Dakota, BLM manages 58,000 acres of surface land and about 4.1 million acres of subsurface minerals. Federal minerals are scattered and often intermingled with state and privately owned minerals due to North Dakota's unique split estate. So, when the federal government imposes blanket restrictions, as included under the Biden-era Resource Management Plan, it blocks development of state and privately owned minerals as well. The state of North Dakota estimates that this plan would cost $34 million every year in lost revenue from oil and gas alone, including revenue for school trust lands that is meant for North Dakota classrooms. I'm pleased to join Senator Cramer and Congresswoman Julie Fedorchak in introducing this CRA resolution, and I urge my colleagues to support it and help overturn this overreaching and restrictive plan. By passing this resolution, we can continue working with President Trump and Interior Secretary Burgum to take the handcuffs off and unleash North Dakota's full energy potential. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.